Hi soilmates, and welcome to episode 5, which is Unbred Heritage Grains. I'm joined as usual by my superstar producer, Claire Mackenzie. Hi Claire.
Hi Richard. I believe this time I'm talking to you in the same time zone, which is exciting.
And that's right, I'm sitting here in Norfolk in amongst heavy arable monocropped fields, the fields which I used to work in a lot for multiple harvests when I was a few years younger than I am today. But it's definitely interesting seeing lots of wheat, all the fields looking identical, quite short, maybe coming up to my knees or something, exactly like I remember them. And quite a lot of kind of GMO style crops, which is super interesting. So this episode, we decided to talk about heritage grains. And why do you think we picked that, Claire?
Well, I think you have pretty much summed it up looking out your window, haven't you? As we know, we've been kind of exploring what, monocropping causing many issues. And so we wanted to look at something that gets called either heritage grains, diverse grains, but those will be revealed. And we're really enthralled by farmers who are going and looking at these particular grains because unlike the short ones you're seeing in the field, they're longer, have a different way of growing. It's sort of looking to the past, but obviously applying modern science, modern technology, modern learnings to this world. And there's an incredible community around it. I think you and I are very enthralled in all of that. I'm really excited about the guests we have this time. Now, I'm just going to make one little point to the audience that although we're talking about diversity within grains, there are 4, 5, or including Richard, five on this. But we choose because we're choosing always the people that bring to the party some incredible insights and knowledge and diverse thoughts, I would say, more than anything. And these 4 bring in something completely different from different angles. And so I'm really excited.
Yeah, that's true. And we've really got some good guests from the whole supply chain. So I called upon a friend called Luke Jones, who works for Understanding Ag, and he's a farmer in the US. And he's a first generation farmer, and he comes into it with a kind of fresh lens. He's also got some kids, and I think that's definitely changed his perspective on the world and how he wants to leave it for them. So he's very knowledgeable, and I'm really looking forward to kind of digging into that. And my other guest, you may want to press pause and go search out Shark Tank Long Table Pancakes, which is it's like Dragon's Den. He goes on there with a very special celebrity guest who I won't say who it is, but he will be there for him when the rain starts to pour. Little clue. He's a really interesting person, and his business is so good. And I'm really glad that it's doing really well and it's growing rapidly. And he's called Samuel Taylor, and I'm really excited to ask him all the questions. And how about you, Claire? Who did we get on from the UK this one?
Delighted that we have our sponsor now as well. We invited him on actually before becoming a sponsor, but we've had some wonderful conversation with Fielden. They're supporting us, and we're really excited to have Dave Smith because he is the founder of Fielden, has deep passion, drive. Really lovely to have him here. It's a real treat. And then we have Fred Price, who is a fascinating farmer from the Southwest, and he works within a grain network as well. He's really he comes from it with this sort of, deeply embedded community feel. He's really fascinating too. So it's great. Exciting.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, let's take a listen. See you at the other side. Welcome everybody to this episode of 6 Inches of Soil, the podcast. It's called Unbred Heritage Grains. And we are joined by some wonderful guests from around the world. But if we start off in the southwest of England, if you explain who you are and where you fit in the heritage grain supply chain, Fred.
Well, hi, Richard. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm Fred Price, and I'm a farmer in the southwest, just outside Bridgewater in Somerset. We kind of practice a old-fashioned lay farming system where we build up fertility and draw down fertility without the use of any synthetics. We're in organic conversion. My friend Rosie has a bakery on the farm. We share a mill together. where I fit into the conversation about grains, and you use the term heritage grains. Heritage for me is an idea, and it positions itself as an alternative idea to a kind of industrial monoculture approach to grains. That's where I fit in. It's really exciting to explore how these different ways of doing grain, both on the farm and off the farm, can really kind of help us develop an agroecological practice for what we do.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And sticking with the UK, we go a little bit further north. Dave, do you want to introduce who you are and where you fit in?
Hi, Richard. Likewise, thanks very much for having me on the 6 Inches of Soil podcast. My name's Dave. I am the CEO, which sounds rather grand, of Fielden Whisky. So Fielden Whisky is an English whisky. It's a rye whisky. We have used heritage grains to make our rye whisky. And I would concur with Fred that heritage grains can have many, many, many definitions. We basically operate a farming system at the front end of our whisky making, which is regenerative farming. But what we call it is no chem regen. So we put nothing in the soil and we put nothing on our crops. We work with about 15 farmers. We currently have about 1,400 acres in the ground, and we'll be planting some spring barley shortly. And we're working really hard just to work out how to make crops that can grow without agrochemicals, that can be kind to the land, how we can do that and make it viable. And okay, it's for whiskey, so I'm not going to be talking today about nutritional food. But I'm going to be talking about, kind of great farming at the front end of a brand.
Yeah, very, very important work that you're doing. So let's cross the pond over to you, Luke, if you could explain who you are, where you are, and where you fit in.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Richard, and good to be on the call with some other interesting individuals, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're all going to have. So my name is Luke Jones. I'm from West Central Illinois, right in the heartland of America, if you will. I'm a row crop and livestock producer here, but also with that, I'm a consultant with the company Understanding Ag. For those of you that aren't familiar with Understanding Ag, it was founded by Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, Dave Brandt, and Ray Archuleta a few years ago, but now it's pretty much managed just by Gabe and Alan right now. I'm one of about 20-some consultants working with the organization. We consider ourselves the premier regenerative ag consulting company, and we work globally. I think right now we're on over 36 million acres. That's a massive scale, but I think in my theory, the way I look at it, I'm a fairly small farmer in my area, pretty much a first-generation farmer, building from the ground up. So I've had to be creative in how to make that work. I wanted to compete with the big boys in the area with the conventional mindset. I grew up very conventional as an ag retail consultant, selling seed, fertilizer, chemical, nuking the world just to help people raise their monocultures. And found a lot of displeasure in that. When you have your first child, it kind of changes you and how you want what you think of nutrition and what that world is going to be for that child when they grow up. So I had a big mindset shift, went full on regenerative. So with that, we're trying to look at how to work more in synchrony with nature. How do we have more higher value, more nutrient dense crops to be able to nourish our community? We're a very poverty stricken community, but people find value in this. And I think it's starting to change here. So I think we're looking more into the heritage and alternative type crops to bring more of a nutritional value to the consumers.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And speaking from personal experience, having kids definitely changes your perspective on the world and what you're going to leave for them and generations to come. So finally, also in the States, Samuel Taylor, do you want to introduce yourself? Not Sam. Tell us where you fit in the heritage grain supply chain world.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. It's always an honor to get to share any space with the farmers and the people who are really doing the work of transforming soil and land and making possible the kind of work I do. I am the founder of Long Table, which is a pancake and waffle mix brand, and our mission is to bring good grains back. Grains really got off track in a really major way in the last 100 years or so, really globally, but my area of understanding is in the United States. And that's kind of a complex and interesting story, but the result is that people lost faith in grains, and I think they lost faith in them for a very good reason. The good news is that the great ones still exist. Heirloom grains are still as nutrient dense and flavorful as they ever were, and you can really still grow them in healthy living soil, which is kind of where I sit on regenerative agriculture, is that it always comes back to the kind of gut health of the planet, which is in soil. And so that's who we are. My hope is to be a part of a movement that makes it possible for grandkids and great grandkids and beyond to be grateful for the food in the world that we handed down the table to them. I, for one, think there's a very real possibility that our generation will either be remembered as people who helped fix a problem that we inherited, or our bones will be cursed for failing a great moral and logistical challenge. And I take that very seriously. And running a pancake and waffle mix brand is my very small part of a global movement that I think is just so exciting for so many reasons. So thanks for having me here.
Yeah, and also, and we'll talk about this as we come to it, but obviously your target market is probably quite, children focused, and so really important that generation starts to properly understand what this all means. But I think a good place to start, Luke, is maybe if you could explain to our listeners, like what is a heritage grain? What does that mean, and how is that different to other grains?
Yeah, so when I think of heritage grains, you hear the terms ancient grains, heirloom, heritage, there's all these terms out there that people use that you're hearing more of anymore. But I consider these just essentially they're a property of a descendant, that hasn't been really manipulated as the modern grains have been. And I credit a lot of this back to the 1950s with the Green Revolution. That's where I think a lot of this really started to shift and change. I look at that, there was probably good intentions behind that, but I think we're really starting to see the negative compounding effects of what that whole initiative led to, with the mass production of grains and cereals to feed this massive growing population. But if you look now, the population trend is actually decreasing. So this whole feed the world mindset, got to grow more with these industrial grains, hybridization, manipulation of certain genetics to try to make this more easy to harvest with larger yields. We want more yield focus than quality focus. So I look at the heritage, heirloom, ancient grains, I consider those more authentic, traditional, nutritive, whereas the modern grains where they're bred for consistency, uniformity, supposedly more resilience in areas, they're more manipulated, industrialized, more modern. For people that want to take a step back and really make it simple, I look at heritage and heirloom grains as that old 1950s Ford stick shift, roll down windows, no climate control in the cab. You can make it work, but it takes work to get it there, right? You got to wear a blanket in the wintertime because there's no heating in there. Or there's, you got to roll the windows down because it's hot. You got to actually manually shift the machine. There's some work that needs to be done, and I think we as producers, we have been pampered over the years. We want our life to be easier because we got to scale this and make things easier and harvest efficiencies, and all this stuff comes into it. Whereas the modern grains and things, they got all the bells and whistles. They've got cruise control, lane departure, airbags, all this good stuff that makes your life so comfy. But then again, maybe it's spoiling us in a way, with these hybrids now. And I'm talking more so than corn, 92 to 95% of the corn grown in the United States is GMO or genetically modified, with herbicide traits and insect traits. And from my experience, Mother Nature is going to win out every time. And those traits are only just a short-term fix. And we're seeing that. So there's a lot of cascading effects, and I'm sure there's other people on here that will explain more into that. But I just compare it simply as the car theory, the modern ones versus the old-fashioned ones. The old ones aren't bad. That's just they take a little more attention, if you will, and more skill to manage them.
And Luke, if somebody was to walk in one of your fields, maybe just before harvest time, what would that look and feel like compared to a conventionally grown GMO field of, say, wheat or barley?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, especially with the wheat, that's probably one of the main things that they manipulated was the height and stature of wheat, and just to have more consistency. A lot of your heirloom small grains are going to be a little more leggy or taller, if you will. There's going to be a little more stem to them, and it's going to be all over the place as far as uniformity and maturity and things like that. But to me, even when you compare an oak tree to another oak tree, yeah, they're similar, but they're not exactly the same. And that's what nature is. It's similarities, but it's not picture perfect carbon copy matches. And that's the beautiful thing about nature. And I think that we've lost track of, we think everything needs to be identical. We thought consumers need identical appearances. And I look at vegetables in the grocery store, there's only so many varieties and they all look the same, right? And there's very few diversity, very little diversity of certain vegetables and produce in the store. And that's the same thing with the row crop world. When I walk into my conventional fields, it's very uniform, ear placement, ear length, ear type. I grabbed a couple examples of my Jimmy red corn, right, that we grow for cornmeal, grits, polenta, and we're going to start a bourbon line with this as well. Dave will have some fun discussions on this, but you can notice the color, shape, size, kernel, it's different, and that's okay. There should be a little diversity and differences in that. So, the ear placement's different. The plant height was different on those fields. I think for me, I've just kind of embraced the differences that Mother Nature will produce, and I'm fine with that. If everything's carbon copy, it's kind of like replicating little evil creatures coming out of the ground that are going to attack us at some point. You got these minions attacking us that all look the same, right? So that's what I see when I walk into my fields. It's the diversity, but more so in our heirloom fields where we're starting to do this stuff. I've embraced that, and you're going to see more chaos, more insect diversity, and things like that. And I can share my screen at some point too, and I can show you another comparison of how the crops will look in field. I thought that might be interesting for people to see as well.
Yeah, well, I think, in especially in the times that we're living right now, the beauty in diversity is something that we could all use. That's for sure. So I kind of wish everybody could hear your message on that. And Fred, you mentioned at the start of the recording that this practice is really important to you. So why is that? And tell us a bit more about how you got into this, because you started as more of a conventional farmer, and now you're where you're at now. So do you want to share why?
Yeah, it was great hearing Luke introduce himself, because I've gone on a similar journey. I think so many farmers have, and that's what's really exciting about regenerative, is it's very accessible, and I think all comers are welcome and all change is welcome. But yeah, I took over my family's farm in 2007 from my aunt. This is a farm kind of deeply embedded in commodity agriculture. The rules of that game mean that it's about scale and it's about yield. That is the language you talk when you are thinking about, it's sort of reticent to say profit and more survival. That forces you down simple cropping systems where you try and manage everything with agrochemicals, where you maximize yield and productivity with stacking herbicide products and fertilizer inhibitors and all sorts of weird and scientifically wonderful inventions that have led us to a place which is kind of scary, where as a farmer, all your interactions and interventions are negative, and where if I just reflect on it with hindsight, I feel like I was a farmer imposing myself on the farm. I was trying to change all of the variables apart from the one, which was my will. And I think now, fast forward to the farmer I am now, I feel much more about I'm part of a system. And I try and change my practices and be reflective of my role in success and failure and adaptive. And really, this kind of conversation around heritage grains, around diversity of cropping, is really slots into that narrative, that change psychologically for me, both in terms of farm practice, but also in terms of the kind of wider off-farm economy and food system questions. But if I stick with farm practice, what I mean is, we would grow a variety from a recommended list published in the UK, which, by the way, over half of the varieties on there are created by one company. And, the leading variety might have a 15 to 20% market share, which in the UK is maybe like 250,000 hectares. That's every sixth field could be the same variety when you're driving along the road. As a pile of grain, 2.5 million tons, where every single grain has exactly the same genetics. Now, this slots into that narrative where you are saying, how does nature operate? Nature operates through selection pressure. So let's give all of these pathogens and problems that could potentially arise, let's give them one genetic gene that's resistant to them. Well, you've just created the biggest selection pressure ever. So these varieties, they have a really high turnover. They're amazing. They have massive market share, and they break down very quickly to disease. And this is the context. This is how we do seed. And it has massive implications right through. And Phil Howard over in the US has a lot to say about consolidation of our food systems and how few companies, 9 or 10 companies control our food system. Well, seed is just a microcosm of that. The biggest mergers of any kind in the last 10 years, Bayer and Monsanto and ChemChina, and I think it's Syngenta. This is a chemical company buying a seed company, chemical company buying a seed company. So I don't think we can be too cynical about how our seed system operates, and actually starting by saying, okay, well, what does it mean to grow something else other than this monoculture, and it might be heritage. For me, it's the idea of heritage. What heritage represents is diversity in the cropping system. And so we actually grow composite cross populations, mainly on the farm. The best example in the UK is the YQ, Wakelands population, which is kind of brainchild of Martin Wolf, who's sadly no longer with us. But this is a population where 20 parents have been selected for yield and quality, which is the Y and the Q, and they're crossed every which way, which is 190 crosses, and you might get 2,000 or 3,000 new genotypes from every cross. So imagine a field where you've got 500,000 genotypes in one field in Somerset. What that does is it kind of completely sidesteps the kind of monoculture approach to managing problems. And it says with diversity, we get resilience, because you have this kind of adaptability through time, because you have such a broad genetic base. And that's really exciting, and it really fits into that narrative of me as a person, as a farmer, shifting from a kind of imposing myself on a system, changing all the variables, to one which is way more adaptive, which is really positive. But what that does do is it begs the question about, beyond the farm gate.
And presumably in your fields as well, with that diversity, you've got deep roots, you've got shallow roots, you've got all different kinds of exudates going to the different depths of your soil and feeding the soil microbes. So you're really helping to feed that soil health, which in turn feeds the resilience of the crop and the nutrient density, I would imagine. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure of the specifics. I'm a farmer. But certainly, if you look at natural systems, what do they all have in common? They're diverse and dynamic. So why are we growing monocultures? I mean, it's just bonkers. And diversity at all levels is required.
Alan Williams says this often, like, where in nature do you find a monoculture? And the answer is nowhere, right? So Dave, coming on to you, it would have been really easy for you just to use generic GMO corns and barleys and rye and things to make your whiskey. Why is this important to you? Why did you decide to go down the regenerative agriculture pathway for your whiskey brand?
First of all, I had not had purpose in my business life, and I'm not a farmer. I'm not a biologist. I'm a businessman, and I'd not had purpose. I'd worked in the drinks industry, and I'd had grain buyers come to me on major global brands telling me what the cost of grain was in my cost of goods to the nth decimal point. I'd worked for distilleries in the Caribbean where the sugarcane didn't even come from the island where we were distilling from. But then I first encountered purpose when I was looking at naturally processed stevia in order to be an ingredient in non-alcoholic beverages. And that got me thinking about purpose in business. I was very fortunate to have met an individual who'd founded a distillery and met someone I believe Fred will probably know called John Letts, who had pioneered the belief around heritage grain in the UK. So his definition would be kind of industrialization, pre-1906, grains that grow wild and grow with nature and develop their own resilience and their own diversity. I was slightly intrigued, having come from the drinks industry, that drinks are an agricultural product, and yet no one was talking about agriculture at all. If 25% to 30% of a drink's carbon footprint come from its agriculture, everyone was talking about greening distilleries, greening their supply chain, greening their packaging, but no one was actually talking about their farming. And I thought there was a real opportunity here. We had a mantra in the business as we went around fundraising to say that we won't divorce farming from distilling, and that we wanted to farm ethically, sustainably, regeneratively. We weren't sure what the word was. And we were fortunate that attracted investment. That's allowed us to really undertake quite an experimental approach to farming at the front end of our business. We farm regeneratively. Well, what does that mean to us? We say no chem regen. We don't want to put anything in the soil, and we don't want to put anything on our crops. So that's our rule. That's where our integrity is, and that's where our contracts are with our farmers. By not putting anything into the soil or onto the crops as they grow, we have this kind of the mantra, which is we have fields full of life, and that's what we're trying to achieve here, is fields full of life. In the middle of that, we have happy farmers. We de-risk all of this experimental farming for the farmer. So we don't talk to them about yield at all. That's our responsibility, working with them, but we take the financial risk on that. And then at the front end of our business, of course, we have whiskey full of flavour. So I have nothing noble, not that whiskey isn't noble, but I have nothing noble like nutritious food. But the principle of the farming remains the same as a nutritious food. We look at the farming and we look at what the challenge is to develop it. We want to farm organically. I say that with a small o, without chemicals. We want to make sure that that we build the yield. So working with heritage grains, working with what I would describe as organically bred. So I don't know if YQ would fall under my definition of that, but working with those, if we just grew our rye year after year, it would get taller and taller and taller, and then it would fall over. Nature would eat itself anyway before it got there. The grains would get smaller. I wouldn't be able to malt and distill them. So I have to think about how I take my heritage grain populations and work with them in an organic system. So that kind of introduces science and plant breeding, way beyond my pay grade, but we've got partners who can help us with that. So that's, for me, the journey I've been on and how we've got to kind of heritage grains within our regenerative farming program at the front end of our business.
And Luke, Dave's talking about flavour there and the experience you get with his whiskey. Can you explain how soil affects that? I think that would be interesting for our listeners to understand that connection.
Yeah, so the way I understand it, Dave, you'd probably be interested to know that one of our clients is actually Maker's Mark. So that's a company that I'm working with here in the United States. And Rob Samuels, he's now CEO of the company. He's got a vision, a very strong vision of he doesn't think we know how good bourbon can taste because of our degraded soils right now. So that's a very strong business vision as far as where he's wanting the company to go. And I can appreciate that. And they're walking the walk themselves. So we're working with their producers to try to help them down that regenerative path. Now, albeit it's very conventional right now, but we try to meet producers where they're at and understand that this is a biological system. And that's where the flavor comes from. The more we can increase biodiversity within the soil, that's where we start to pick up the flavor profiles, I think, and some of the grains and everything that we're working with. The more biology, more bugs and critters we have underneath our feet that's working in synchrony with the plant roots that they're stimulated by, that's where those flavor profiles start to come in. The different minerals and secondary and tertiary compounds fill that plant. It's through that diversity that's in the soil.
And Samuel, coming on to you, so you decided to get into, I would imagine, an extremely crowded marketplace in the pancake and waffle world here in the States, which is, I would guess, way more prevalent than it is in the UK. I've got 2 young kids, and that's definitely one of the principal breakfasts that they look forward to, well, especially at the weekends in our household. I'm curious, why did you decide to link up to the heritage grain world rather than just use, conventionally GMO heavy crops for your pancakes and waffles? Before we get to the answer, we'll be right back. Take it away, Tilly.
6 inches of soil is made possible by...
Fielden is the English whiskey that's changing farming for the better. Field by field, harvest by harvest. Fielden is bringing England's fields back to life with diverse grains that thrive naturally. No sprays, no artificial fertilizers, no shortcuts. It's no chem, regenerative farming without chemicals. The result? Healthy soils, clean waters, flourishing biodiversity, a smaller carbon footprint, and whiskey full of flavour. Think warm, flaky pastry, butter and caramel. Fields full of life, whiskey full of flavour. Visit fielden.com, Fielden, and remember to drink responsibly.
Back to you, Daddy.
I'm curious, why did you decide to link up to the heritage grain world rather than just use, conventionally GMO heavy crops for your pancakes and waffles?
I feel like there's 2 types of food founders that I've met. And one of them, worked at Kellogg's for 20 years and raised a bunch of money and poached a team of people and launched in 2,000 stores at once. I'm the other kind. And the other kind is a bunch of beautiful maniacs who had an idea to start a business without really understanding what they were doing, and has learned everything really the hard way and in person. And so my story about how I got into heirloom and heritage grains does not come from a market perspective originally. It comes from the fact that they tasted great. Honestly, I am the kind of person who just doesn't know how to do things halfway, and I got obsessed with pancakes. And I was making pancakes 5 days a week for about 2 years. And when you eat that much of a thing, you really start to appreciate the difference between the ingredients. And I used to be a Shakespearean actor, and I was on a gig in Wisconsin at the American Players Theater, and I was buying flour, and I biked 5 miles over to the closest place I could get flour, which was a stone mill. And I met this cantankerous old guy named Gilbert. And he explained to me the difference between stone ground grains and roller milled grains, and how the stone milled grains, really what goes into the mill comes out of the mill. And with a roller milled grain, everything that tastes good and all the nutritional value is stripped out. And that, I was just trying to buy 5 pounds of flour, and it totally rearranged my whole head and my whole life eventually. So thank you, Gil. And here's where I want to push back on Luke on the car metaphor. And I think it speaks to who grains have been designed for over the last 100 years or so, and how they've been designed. Because if you're a farmer and a producer, it's undeniable that like the conveniences of pesticide and monocropping are considerable from a mechanization of the farm standpoint. If you're a baker, you're not getting any advantages apart from cost. Every other possible advantage you could have, of flavor, of nutrition, of performance, of delight, of variety, of interest in your life from a food perspective, all of that has been sort of sacrificed at the altar of volume, all of it. And so coming at it from the opposite perspective, I was trying to impress my girlfriend with pancakes, and the right way to do that was to use really great ingredients. And we gave out pancake mix at our wedding a few years later, and only later did we really start a farmer's market stall. It was years where we were just operating a farmer's market stall selling these pancake mixes before I came to business really full time and really dedicated myself to it. And that was during the really bleak, bad times of 2020, when we had an 18-month-old and our whole other careers in acting. And she's an acrobat, so both of our whole careers were just totally wrecked. And we had an 18-month-old kid, and I thought, the world is freshly revealing itself as breakable every day. And here's this one little tiny thing that I have that is a little seedling of something hopeful, which had to do with the regenerative supply chain and the farmers I was working with. And I thought, what other opportunity in life do I have to take something and not just try to reduce the harm that it's doing, but really flip the whole system on its end, and not only provide better tasting, more nutritious food to people, but also start to combat climate change, also start to clean water systems, increase biodiversity, create a more resilient, more thriving world for the kind of world my kid's going to have to live in. And the moment I thought, okay, I'm doing this full time, it occurred to me that my son, who was 18 months old then, it occurred to me he was going to be 16 years old one day. He was going to be able to look at me, and he was going to be able to say, like, hey, Dad, you knew about all of these problems, climate change, loss of biodiversity, the whole thing. You knew about it from the time you were in 5th grade. Did you do anything about it? I, for one, want to have a damn good answer for him when he asks that question. And long table is how I try. But sorry, I kind of wandered off the beaten path there. As speaking to the question of why heirloom grains, it's because they taste better. It's not super advanced. It's the plants, the crops that are in the field, they're sending out their roots into the soil, right? And they're asking for what they need to grow. And that's how they feed, that's how they eat, right? Is what is in that soil. And it's a little bit like if you only drank protein shakes and took vitamin pills, how do you think that would go for you? Probably not great. You probably would not be at your best and healthiest self, right? You need a complex diet, and plants do the same thing. And so really speaking to what you're speaking about, Fred, about complexity, is like I really view not only the types and varieties of grains and the complexity that's in that field full of life, but also the complexity that's in the soil as the bedrock of complex and healthful nutrition and complex and interesting taste.
And what do you, I mean, the people that eat your pancakes, obviously, I would say many would be in a situation similar to you with young kids who want to make better choices for their families. But equally, it's pretty overwhelming if you're in the aisle of the grocery store and you've got, two screaming kids in the shopping cart and you've got about 3 seconds to make that decision of which, pancake mix to put in your shopping trolley, if that's what you're doing. How do you kind of communicate that complex message to them? Like, what do you want consumers to know about your pancakes, and particularly, the heritage grain aspect of them? How do you tackle that?
Well, that's a great question. And the first thing we do is we try not to look like anybody else on shelf. The packaging that we have has got illustrations of some of the farms where we grow our pancakes, as well as some more fantastical illustrations. And it's really done in a style that hopefully is kid-friendly and communicates that this is a fun package for a kid to look at while you're making the pancakes, but also is cute and communicates to an adult who maybe cares about what kind of coffee they drink, for example, that this fits into your life and this fits into how you want to operate. I would say that 5% of our customers at most are interested in soil health. I would say 20% of our customers at most understand the difference between an heirloom grain and a commodity grain. What brings them to it is the visual appeal and the promise that we are doing the work so you don't have to. That we are putting the kind of attention into this product that you can trust. And that's a very subliminal thing. That is not about what we send out in our emails. That's about how we look. That's about how we present. Then you eat it. And as they say, the proof is in the pancakes, right? That's the saying? I'm pretty sure it's proof is in the pancakes, right? And that's what keeps people coming back, is that because they feel fuller for longer, because it's not a stripped out sort of modern commodity grain that's lost a lot of its nutrition. They feel fuller for longer, they feel better, they feel more like they can do things, and it tastes great. And that's the most important way in which we can communicate with customers, is not through language, not through messaging, but is through the food itself. What comes from the soil, what goes into the crops, what goes through the mill, how does it come onto your plate? That's a whole language that people understand intuitively. So that's kind of where we try to sit for people. And
I think another thing which comes to mind, Fred, is you and Luke and farmers like yourselves are doing amazing work. You're a consumer with a child, but also you're a farmer. How do you connect to people like Samuel and Dave? Presumably that's quite a hard journey. Like, how do you discover people downstream of you who really care about what it is that you're doing?
I guess with the benefit of hindsight, it's easy to package up your experiences into a kind of neat narrative that creates this kind of flow of, this seductive flow of like inevitability about the last 20 years for me. Really, it's been lots of small steps, but I'm going to do it anyway. And really, like the first 5 years, I pretty much did what everyone else was doing, did what I read in the Farmers Weekly on steroids, and kind of appreciated what it felt like to be there, both personally and financially. And the risk was all on us, and it was a broken model biologically and functioning how it functioned on the farm, but a broken model financially. And if I spin around here now, my dozen or so neighbours back in 2007, most of them are being farmed by two big companies, an AD plant, an aerobic digestion plant that way, and a big 900 cow dairy that way. So, there's a financial kind of push. There's a burning platform, I really believe, about how we adapted and evolved. And what I'm trying to say is that there's what happens on farm, but you have to be empowered to make those choices as a farmer. And the way I've found that I can empower myself to decide how I want to make my mistakes and how I want to explore successes is by reimagining the kind of world within which the farm sits. And that's largely a conversation around relocalizing food, a kind of small food economy, which is mediated by trust and relationships. And so it's actually, in response to your question, it's absolutely essential, in my view, that we do that piece of work and think about who's eating our food, remind ourselves that we're producing food rather than putting a kind of widget, a commodity on a lorry with no idea where it's going. This kind of totally dehumanized commodity system. And remember that we can reimagine a human scale system, and that starts business to business on farm. I mean, I have a unique kind of set of privileges that has enabled myself and my friend Rosie to co-own a stone mill, and her have her bakery here, and me grow grain for the bakery. But that's relevant to us, but it's also about, you know, how we create a wider opportunity for change. And there's lots of different examples of that. And the best one I can think of is 5 or 6 years ago, a group of us started the Southwest Grain Network, which is a loose collection of people who eat bread, people who don't eat bread, a bit like Samuel's description of his customer base, people who come at it with totally different kind of gazes, but broadly farmer.
And Fred, that the Southwest Grain Network, is that that's kind of intermediary that somebody like Dave could tap into to get heritage grains? Is that kind of it's kind of like a cooperative? Is that what that is?
So yeah, what it is it's a network. It's not a kind of top-down organizational structure or anything like that. It's a very kind of horizontal network with people with shared values and a mutual interest. The mutual interest is often financial, business to business, but the shared values is really important. It's something we practice and consent to as a group regularly.
So it's a group of farmers. Is that what it is?
Farmers, bakers, millers, seed breeders, food activists, systems, things, you know, consumers, all sorts. Yeah. And we come together several times a year. We exist on social media and WhatsApp platforms. There's loads of knowledge exchange and kind of unpicking all the barriers to relocalizing a food system. What it fundamentally is a group of people with shared mutual interest that act according to relationships and friendships. And that's really powerfully and radically different from the system we're talking about, which is a kind of dehumanized commodity system, which is, you know, all about industrialization, intensification, consolidation, power, control. And my concern when we talk about regen agriculture, and we talk about it on so often within the parameters of farm practice, we have to think about the whole food system, because otherwise we will just reinvent the same problems, the same power structures, the same control. What we're after, what Samuel has described, is a supply chain which is about care. And it can be care for loads of different things according to who you are and what your perspective is. And there's no one simple, sexy message to sucker everyone in. It's all about relationships and friendships.
And that sense of community as well. It sounds like an amazing community to be a part of. Luke, coming back to you. So we've established that the proof is in the pancake. So we've got breakfast sorted. Now, as a parent, you've had a long day. You desperately need a drink of whiskey, which Dave is going to make for us. Can you help us really understand what your corn is going to do to Dave's whiskey and Maker's Mark whiskey so that parents can sleep at night knowing they've done some good in their choices?
Well, it's going to be so good you're only one glass instead of multiple glasses. It'll knock you on your socks pretty fast. No. You know, I can really resonate with what Fred said there. I looked at, and back to, I guess, to the car metaphor, I didn't want to mislead anybody on that, Sam. I think I looked at it from the producer standpoint. It's easy. They've modernized this to make it easy. And Fred made a comment earlier on about how chefs and bakers, you guys are artists. So you guys can take some of the harder grains, the ancient and heirloom things, and make them phenomenal. But they're so good that they don't really need that much work either. Whereas all these other modern grains need fortification and all this stuff to make them taste good. But my wife, she's a phenomenal baker. And if she was baking with conventional products, I'd be 400 pounds, I'm sure. But since she bakes with nutrient dense products, I'm able to hold my own. But it's just feeling that fulfillment. So how do you get people aware of this? As producers, we can produce. We're good at that. We're good at doing our job, but marketing we suck at. It's probably the hardest thing to do is marketing, to get consumers and everybody to be aware of what you're doing and how good it is. The first thing you got to do is just get it in their mouth. So we actually had some field days and we made some Jimmy Red corn muffins to serve with our pulled chicken, which was from our pasture raised meat birds, at a field day, talking about alternative farming methods and different practices to do. And, you know, as the financial advisor here in the United States says, Dave Ramsey, he always says, that's normal, be weird, you know. So farmers that are farming conventionally are going broke. You're breaking even. I consider them a money conduit. They're just trading dollar for dollar to keep the big agrochemical companies afloat to fill their markets. And I've always laughed that we're going to be it's not funny, but we're one step away from these agrochemical companies just paying a farmer to be a custom farmer for the land to provide their produce that they need. And we're essentially there. But really what it comes down to is getting it into their mouth. When they can actually taste how good and how this product will satiate you more than you go to the Mexican restaurant down the road and you're hungry as soon as you get home. Whereas if you eat some of the stuff that we're raising, even though it's small scale, you notice it. You notice the difference. And then the fact that you can tell a story behind it about why we're better for the local ecosystem more so than the alternative method, that's huge. You know, I want to help my producers I'm working with and understand that small scale of something like an heirloom grain can replace 10 acres of a conventional acre based on profitability. I've tried to relay that and just get them out of their comfort level. I dance to the beat of a different drum, and I'm fine with that. The things that we do get laughed at, but the way I look at it, if they're making fun of me, they're leaving somebody else alone. So I'm fine with that. Yeah, it's just getting it in the consumer's mouth, and that resonates.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, do you guys have questions for each other? I mean, you're all kind of in the same space. You know, we're talking about regenerative practices, about corn, whiskey, pancakes, community, you know, what the rules of farming, yields, things like that. I just was curious, you know, you've got this forum to speak to people at both ends of the supply chain. If you had questions for anybody else here, don't be shy.
Dave, you're talking about the whiskey that you make and talking about not really being, you're sort of self-deprecating as not really being as much a part of the movement as others maybe. And I wanted to push back on that because I think what I see certainly here in the United States is that the brewing and distilling markets have been consistently 5 to 10 years ahead of the food market as far as the kinds of varieties that they're using, the kinds of sophistication in the sort of flavor palette, and the education of the consumers. There's kind of nobody, at least here where I am in Chicago, there's nobody who knows more about grains on a general day-to-day basis than people who drink a lot of beer. And those people also buy food. And the fact that you have a kind of consumer base that is really kind of fetishizes, like, where did this come from? What is the terroir of this whiskey? What is the what's the grain bill about, is a huge part of what makes it possible for then that person, when they go from being maybe 35 and really into whiskey to 37 and really into their child eating breakfast, there's a straight line for that consumer. So I just wanted to thank the brewers and distillers, not only Dave, but everybody else here in the Midwest where I am and everywhere, for providing probably the best set of education on heirloom grains that currently exists in the market.
That's very kind, Samuel. Yes. Ultimately, I've heard lots of talk about, on the food side of the debate, about the kind of the land gut and the gut mind relationships. And sometimes when I'm listening to that, I'm going, well, let's be totally honest, the alcohol can influence the mind quite quickly, a social lubricant or to relax you, whichever way you may be drinking, he said discreetly. But I think that you're right. There is something that's emotive about the brewing and distilling industry. There is, in classic terms, marketing, a 1-9-90. So 1% of our consumers will be whiskey geeks. Therefore, they're up for this information. 9% will be whiskey enthusiasts. They're up for this information. And in this sense, 90% of the people who might buy or interact with whiskey, it's a lot of volume, it's a lot of value in the whiskey market from a businessman's perspective. They may be buying it as a gift. And so therefore, they're kind of looking at it going, well, I ain't going to drink it, but let me gift purposefully. And so we can play into that area as well. And I think there's a real opportunity, and it's happening at a pace in the spirits industry, for the storytelling that you're talking about to resonate pretty quickly. But I also think, for me, and it's a fascinating piece because I love, I first met John Letts. He was like the patron saint of heritage grain in the UK. And I hope he doesn't mind me saying that. That's a compliment. But I listened to the soulfulness of your narrative and Fred's narrative. and I've heard it many times over the last 5 years, and I think that it's fantastic. I guess where I might argue I try and fit into this ecosystem is that I want to scale your soulfulness. And in scaling it, I look at what the structures are within the marketplace that stop me doing it. So one might be the whiskey market. It's all about casks and water and provenance and where you're from. We're not named after the place where our distillery is. That's pretty rare. We're named after Fielden, the old English word of the field. Our brand home is in the field. And I look at how you might break the structures within whiskey, but then how also you might break the structures of the consumer's perception of the agriculture at the front end of a product. And this is why at first I was kind of like, ooh, regenerative, I'm not sure. Feels like everyone's marking their own homework. There's a rainbow here, and John Letts used to call it a grainbow, which I love, where it was a conventional farm that put nothing other than a few beehives on and went, ooh, look at us, we're regenerative. And at the far end of this is people like ourselves trying to do very high risk, no chem regen farming with arable crops. But what I've learned from going to, well, I went to a conference last week, but apparently it was a gathering around people interested in regenerative fashion and regenerative agriculture, is I kind of feel, and this is like with the ecosystem that I'm operating in, that regenerative is building through such a level of inclusivity that if it's going to knock the consumer, something's going to knock the consumer over here, it's the regenerative movement. It's not the kind of pure organic movement, which can operate beautifully at one level with a purity, but regenerative actually is the piece. So I kind of have visions that 10 years from now, you'll walk into a UK retailer and you're going to have to walk past a regeneratively farmed UK produced seasonal product in order to get to the and other product, where there might be a price premium on that piece you walk through, but behind it is your saving. And that, for me, I guess, is the commercial scale-up or the future vision of so much of the soulfulness that yourself, Samuel, and Fred talk about.
And just quickly, I've got one question to throw into the mix, which is from a farmer friend of mine called Sam Lucy, who has an amazing business up in Washington State called Bluebird Farms. And he asked, are grains like einkorn and emmer actually more nutritious? I don't know, Luke, or maybe Samuel or Fred or Dave, have you guys done any tests on that to answer that question?
There are a lot of people who've done a lot of tests on that question, and there's a bunch of scientific studies that have come out, over the last, 80 years that chart a really alarming decline in nutrition density of commodity grains. And so what you see is even the same kind of wheat that we were growing 50 years ago, if you're just looking at like a hard red wheat, or if you're looking at a winter white wheat, if you're looking at one of those, the nutrition density of those has dropped like a rock. We've lost 25%, I want to say, of the protein content in most commodity grains since 1950.
Wow.
And a lot of that has to do with monoculture. And a lot of that has to do with the kinds of cycles of sort of crop engineering that Fred was speaking so well to. But a lot of that also has to do with soil health and nutrition. So there's a huge amount of information. Like it's not ambiguous. It's not a like, well, maybe. It's a definite. And we can certainly provide some links to some of those sort of peer-reviewed studies. But as far as einkorn and emmer and those sorts of things, in many cases, the difference there is not subtle either. In many cases, the fiber content, for example, of those grains, because they're smaller and because the bran is larger on those, is just going to be way more than what you're used to. And part of the reason for that is those kinds of older grains are much more in sync with nature, and they need to be attractive as food to birds and other animals in order to spread and to change in the wild. Whereas the monoculture crops, they're trying to enlarge the white part, the endosperm of the grain, as large as it possibly could be, because that's the fluffy and tasty part. Right? It's not even the tasty part. It's the fluffy, shelf-stable part. And so, yes, the nutrition density of these grains like emmer, like einkorn, like purple barley, there's just such a huge, to use your word, there's a huge rainbow of like amazing flavors out there. Boy, this is the longest way of saying yes to any question I've ever had done. Are those grains more nutrient dense? Yes. Yes. You scratch the surface of that question and you're going to get a huge amount of very well-researched data.
I'd agree with Samuel on that for sure. And it does come down to the soil biology too, and the amount of carbon you have in that soil as well to kind of help finish that grain off, if you will. But yeah, there's tons of data. I know in the 25% reduction in nutrient value, I've heard anywhere from 25 to 50% protein reduction in the modern grains. And that's real. And I think that becomes from the fact that this industrial process over fertilizing, over feeding these plants that they have no biological association. You know, when you pull up these plants, they have white roots. White roots is not a healthy plant. That means they have no biological association, whereas a single corn seed can have between 7 and 9 billion microorganisms on it. So it's inoculated with the biology in that environment. But what do we do in conventional systems? We buy in new seed every year from being produced, God knows, South America, wherever, it doesn't matter, in a lab. That biology that seed is inoculated with was probably nuked anyway because it's going to be treated, but has very little to do with the environment it's going to be raised in. So the more that we can adapt or create a landrace plant within our own environment and management systems, that plant now starts to become more nutrient dense, even more so because it's in synchrony with the biology in your system and in your soil. So yeah, I think it's already got the leg up, but the more you can start to work with it in a landrace standpoint, the better off it'll be. I think there's no ceiling on how high it can go.
Just quickly explain that word landrace. Explain that.
Landrace, yeah. So that's essentially like what's adapted or what's been genetically selected for your environment or your. It's been a race that's been developed on your land, essentially. So it's adapted to your system.
Yeah. So that's the practice of saving some of the seeds from your harvest and then planting them next year, right?
That's correct. I could take the seed from this plant here, and it's going to be more so adapted to my environment because it's an open pollinated, not a hybridized type of grain. If you planted the grain from a hybrid corn, for one, it's probably illegal from plant variety patents, but it's not going to be the same as what its plant was in the original first place. So we got some black einkorn that we're going to be planting here pretty soon that we're going to start working with, and we've actually moved to a public variety soybean so that we can start adapting genetics to our environment and our management system instead of buying a new seed every year. So that's the route we're going.
Yeah, it's really, really important work you're doing. So we've got only a minute or so left here. I was wondering if each of you could perhaps wrap up with a closing thought of if you were talking to a confused but curious consumer right now, what would you want them to know about heritage grains? Fred, do you want to give a brief thought on that? And I'll come to all of you with that.
Goodness. What would I want a consumer to know? If I'm honest, some of the lines of questioning we've been headed towards have been, in my mind, remind me of this desperate feeling that I needed a silver bullet because I was part of a dysfunctional biological and economic system. Heritage grains lead you to that. They're this kind of sexy solution to everything. For me, what heritage and diverse cropping and cereal seed systems are about is actually, they're like a wedge in the door. They start making us ask sensible questions of all sorts of things. At what scale can we retain that soulfulness and the purpose that Dave was talking about? What does it mean for our legislative environment? What does it mean for our food system more broadly? But anyway, to answer your question, I think the easiest way that a consumer could end up where I am now is just by saying, well, who's my farmer? Who's grown this?
Yeah. I think that's so important to know where your food comes from. Luke, what would your closing thoughts be?
Yeah, know your farmer, know your food, for sure. Get connected with those that are trying to help nourish you. You know, like I said, I've been on both sides of the aisle, from the industrial part of it to now to where we're trying to help each and every farmer regenerate an acre of land at a time. The whole feed the world, get bigger, get out model. I don't think people realize the food waste in the United States. I think it's on average 1 pound of food waste per person per day. There's a pound of food waste per person every day in the United States that we're just throwing away. So mass production, it's overproducing less quality food. So what if, people say, well, we've still got to feed the world, but you can feed the world, but are you nourishing the world? And I think these ancient grains, the the plants and the varieties that are adapted to your geographical area that you can actually disperse within your community are going to nourish your community more so than essentially short-term feed them. So that's our focus. And like Fred says, know your farm, know your food. Look at the labels of the food you're buying. That's, if you can't pronounce it, stay away from it.
Yeah, I like that. Dave, thoughts?
I would just echo. For me, I love this idea that it all starts with the soil. From the soil comes the health of the planet, the health of people. And somehow we have to find a way of collectively messaging and perhaps not competing with each other on that message.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Again, coming back to diversity and how we can achieve so much more together. Samuel, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think what's really important for people to understand is just how desperately important grains are, period. Estimates range between 25 and 50% of people's calories come from grains. And that's enormous. That is a global importance and systemic issue. As Luke was sort of alluding to, there's a very small number of companies that control the vast majority of how that operates. Those companies can afford to do that because of what people buy at the grocery store. And what I think people don't understand is little choices in small places create trends and lines in grocery that have real meaningful impact. So that if there is a 3% increase in a certain kind of category in your local grocery store, the buyer who buys the products to put on those shelves knows that. And the growth in a given category points the whole industry. So where growth is, the industry follows. And so it seems like, which kind of pancakes do I buy? What kind of rice do I buy? What kind of corn chips am I buying? It is an important question. But if you represent one part of a 3% change in your local grocery store, it has a huge impact on the placement of those brands in those grocery stores. That has a knock-on effect. Those brands can then afford to contract with, because if they get a bigger order, they can contract with the farmers. Then the farmers understand what they're growing, and the farmers understand what to plant in the next season. And so you get this huge knock-on effect that sort of is pushing one of the most important industries in the world to a better place. And that's can't be overstated, I think, the importance of that. And it has to do with the kind of world we hand down, right? Like the brand that I run is called Long Table. And the reason it's called that is, we don't just hand food down the table to the next generations, to our kids, to our grandkids. We hand a whole world down that table. What we hand down that table matters. And grains are up to 50% of what we put on the table. So how we think about grains is of huge importance to us, to what we eat, to how we feel every day, to what we taste every day, and to the lives and well-being of our kids and the next generations.
Yeah. Gosh, it makes me feel emotional thinking about that stuff. I love that. Thank you so much, all of you, for being on today's episode. We're really grateful for your time, your expert input. It's a complex topic, but thank you for helping us kind of simplify it to a little degree and get a better understanding, and empowering us to make better choices when we next go out to buy food or drink. So thank you so much for all of your work.
Well, soil mates, what a treat of an episode that was. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, Claire?
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I think it's a complex subject. When we were trying to make 6 inches of soil, I really wanted to include this topic, but it really it was too deep for that film. It's quite complex. But I think these 4 guests do a really good job of breaking it down. And that's obviously what we're trying to do, bringing in the guests that can make it simple, but also make it exciting and make you want to explore further. And they definitely do that. And I do recommend to everyone to try and read up on this, especially the history I love the history of where these all come from. Einkorn and Emma coming from the Fertile Crescent, from the Middle East, etc., and just learning about the journey of grains is very beautiful.
Yeah, it's magical. And just all of them wonderful communicators. I think it's really refreshing to know that there are businesses, brands out there with such purpose, like listening to, well, first of all, Dave talk about Fielden and how he came set up and how, he's an entrepreneur businessman, but ultimately he's got purpose, which is driving him to turn Fielden into what it is today and what it is becoming for the future. So I really enjoyed learning that there are businesses like Fielden out there doing things because it's not only better for you, but it is profitable too. And Samuel, I could listen to him for hours. Obviously, with his theatre background, he's married to an acrobat, which is phenomenal. But just the way he talks about his business and pancakes, I was starving by the end of that episode. So I'm looking forward to going eating a pancake as soon as I possibly can. And definitely his concept of having like the long table of passing down food from our generation to the next generation all sat together, I think is really powerful. But there were some amazing quotes. What were some that stuck out for you?
Yeah, I just quickly, while we're on what you're talking about there, first of all, I'd love to know, have you tried Fielden whiskey? I think you've said you have before.
I've had a little dabble. Yeah, it's so. It is. I know that there are sponsors, so maybe I'm slightly biased, but it is a really good whiskey, and I love that it's got such a mission attached to it. So with every sip, I'm not just thinking of the experience I'm having, I'm thinking about the agriculture that's kind of gone into that glass, and there's something kind of special about that. So yeah, I do like that.
But I have equally tried it and not so keen on whiskey, but I found it really lovely. But actually the one I'm really enthralled about, because I tried to order them here, sadly those listening in Britain, the long table pancakes you can't actually get so I'd love to know from you, Richard, what they taste like, so we can bring that taste sensation to the listener.
Yeah, true. I should have actually bought some over in my suitcase as I sit here in Norfolk right now. But yeah, they're just extremely fluffy, as he says, because he pops the kernel into popcorn first before grinding it down into the pancake flour, which I don't know anybody else who does that, but it really does make a difference. And you do feel fuller for longer. And so I'm a really firm believer in, look after the soil, and then the stuff that grows from the soil really is more nutrient dense. It does make you feel fuller for longer. And obviously you have the kind of emotional connection of knowing that he's supporting farmers like Luke and like Fred, and that makes me happy for sure.
Yeah, amazing. Fred has always been, he's very well supported, and really people are very, very keen on the work he's doing down in the Southwest, and he pulls together the Southwest Grain Network and leads on it, and it's brilliant to hear about that. I love the way he works with the baker on his farm, and he's talks about community the entire time, and reminding us that it's not just for yield and profit, that there's so much more to this production process, and that food shouldn't just be a commodity. And he's got that reconnection with food, definitely by growing a grain and then being able to process it in a mill is pretty unique. And he has animals as well, so that was really, really special. I'm hearing from Luke, and he's got some photos that I think we were sharing via social media, etc. But when you look at his red corn, you've never heard of that, and just the way he's been experimenting as well, and in wonderful pictures with his daughter and these healthy roots, etc. So there's some, fascinating learnings, and he's, with Understanding Ag, he's helping other farmers as well, which is really lovely to see. And the same with Fred, they're working with lots of different people to help the learnings, because it's complex, difficult to change. It's great you've got the modern varieties, and whether it's normally a bag of, agronomist comes and you've got your chemicals, you've got pesticides, etc., to balance it all out, and the right nitrogen fertilizers, etc., which is great. But with these, you're in a whole nother territory. So
yeah, it's great. And that word community really stands out. I think as long as I've been involved in agriculture, and particularly regenerative agriculture, it is such a warm and welcoming community, and everyone is wanting to help each other. And you've got brands wanting to support farmers who are doing it right, and you've got farmers who are really open to share what they're doing and also learn new things. And so I'm really excited of what lies ahead as more and more people find out about this movement and really understand the wider benefits of it all. On that note, we're recording this in June 2025, and we are about to meet up in person at an event called Groundswell. So what's Groundswell about, Claire?
Oh, Groundswell. Yeah, it's amazing. This will be my 5th time. I think 1 or 2 of our team from 6 Inches of Soil are going, but particularly Richard and I will be there with the podcast hat on this time, and hopefully giving out a few little things that we're about to order. So watch this space. Come and find us. We'll definitely be having coffee, won't we, with Marcus?
Definitely. So Marcus from Roots, the last episode, will be there serving some regenerative coffee grown by Roberto Matter and roasted and, well, imported by Galley, so previous guests. So that's exciting. Gabe Brown is going to be there, who was on episode 1. So really excited to catch up with him. And also Tim Parton is definitely going to be there. So we'll have a few friends of the pod available, and if you see us, do come and say hello. We'll be around and about. It'd be lovely to see you all, and yeah, thank you so much for listening. It's been really fun.
And look out for our posters as well. There'll be one at Fielden, one at Roots, and probably one at with you at Regenerative as well.
Yeah, Regenerative and Understanding Ag, we're all kind of together, so there'll be definitely some posters there too. So yeah, come say hi, and thanks again for listening, and we will see you soon. Bye.